All men are born with the potential for excellence and greatness, but most are wasting this potential. The hidden key that men like Caesar and Cicero were practicing, and which also Plato wrote about at length, is Eros. It's a secret that, though it's been known for thousands of years, today very rarely is applied. What we're going to do in this video is to give a brief introduction to the notion of Eros and how it can help us cultivate greatness. Alright, today we're going to try something quite bold. You see, one of the things that strike me the most in this whole notion of becoming great, and where men are looking up to, ancient great men like Caesar and others, is the role of Eros, of love and of beauty in this pursuit for excellence. Because I believe it's quite often overlooked, and maybe that is because of stigma and things like that, but nonetheless it is absolutely significant. Like, just to make a little example, Caesar and many others of the great Roman men there, they worshipped Venus. And it was not just like, oh yeah, let's hang a bit with Venus. Like, no, Venus was really one of the central pillars in the Roman worship, and that they attributed their greatness to a large extent to her. Even many soldiers and generals, they were inscribing her name on their weapons in order to protect them and to help them achieve this greatness and excellence in their life and on the battlefield. So there is a clear connection to Eros and to love and to the worship of femininity in this process of perfecting the soul and of achieving greatness. One of the places we see this is in the Symposium, which is a dialogue by Plato that is focusing on Eros and focusing on the role of love. And when I started reading it recently, I realized that it is really full of insights, that a lot of them are hidden in between the lines, that there is many principles that we can find in other traditions, not the least the tantric tradition, that are deeply meaningful, and when they are understood, they can really potentiate this use of love and Eros in order to cultivate greatness. But I do think that they are quite often overlooked, because we tend to read these pieces like these works, like the Symposium, in a very dry and intellectual way. And the experiential understanding of the meaning of them is rarely there. It just becomes, reduced to concepts that are dry, and it might sound fancy, but it doesn't necessarily impact, our experience of life that deeply. And because of that, the understanding tends to be very, very shallow as well, because it's not a lived experience and not a lived understanding. It's just mental speculation. So what I want to do as a project that I'm starting here now is to make a commentary on Plato's Symposium from a more practical perspective, and also from the perspective of universal principle and laws that we can see also primarily in the tantric tradition, which is where I am more have my firmer footing than in the Greek. But I will also aim to really show how this is not just some tantric ideas here, but it's not Eastern thought, but these are perennial universal principles that obviously is at the core also of the Greek tradition. And though it will be quite metaphysical, it will be philosophical, with the aim of really understanding these laws and principles so that we can implement them in our lives, I will also do my best to bring it down to more practical elements and examples to the extent that is possible in this format. This is also something that really should be taught in courses and more supervised environments of teaching. But my hope is that it can be also inspiring and very useful for your own practice of cultivating excellence in your life. So without further ado, we're diving in and we're beginning with the first talk. Just as a little short introduction there, this book, the Symposium, this dialogue, it's basically one guy retelling stuff he overheard at a party, which he thought was awesome. So there was a bunch of guys, including Socrates, who gathered at a feast, and they spoke about love, one after the other. They had separate speeches, and then there was one guy who was there who remembered some of it, and he told his friend about it. And that's basically what the Symposium is. So with that necessary introduction, we are diving into the first speech, which is told by Phaedrus. Phaedrus' speech is a praise to Eros as the most important god in the cultivation of virtue and greatness. And that's not really a small thing, is it? And then he's also going into a bit of the, cosmology, how the god Eros was created, and the effects of worshipping him and so on. We'll get into all that. How he starts is by saying that Eros is the oldest and the noblest and mightiest of the gods, and he is the chiefest author and giver of virtue in life, and of happiness after death. It's not a small thing. And as I insisted on there in the introduction, Eros really is a key to greatness. Even the Greeks thought that themselves. It's like without a deep understanding and practice of love and Eros, like greatness is not attainable. And he then goes on also a little bit of referencing what he's meaning here with being the eldest, because that's important. It's not just saying, oh yeah, he was old and that's cool. But no, Eros is the first god that appears, and that is very meaningful. The way it's described by Hesiod is that in the beginning of everything there was only chaos. Chaos, as it means in the Greek literature, does not mean that everything is, the world is upside down, everything is just chaotic and nobody knows what's going on. It's not a children's party with no adults. But chaos means the undifferentiated void. It's a nothingness before creation. It's the same as the abysmal void that is described in the Nordic creation myths. It's also the same as the void in Genesis. And then from this nothingness, what is first created is what Hesiod called the broad-bosomed earth. So it's earth with the big breasts, which is obviously a feminine character, right? Gaia, the earth, is a feminine character. And what appears here then is a polarity. We have the nothingness, which is the transcendent aspect of God, which traditionally is considered the masculine principle. And then you have the feminine, the creative, the manifest and immanent aspect of God. So you have the transcendent and you have the creative force. And this is, for those who know, obviously analogous to the polarity between Shiva and Shakti in the Indian tradition. And in the Indian, and particularly in the Tantric tradition, the whole creation is described as a lovemaking between the masculine and the feminine principle. It is their orgastic, ecstatic lovemaking that is creating the universe. And we see this also in the Greek tradition, where Hesiod is saying that from the chaos, earth was born, and then Eros, love. So love, which is this attraction, is this unifying force, is what connects and facilitates for the interaction between the masculine and the feminine. Without love, they're like, imagine Adam and Eve running around the Garden of Eden, and they don't care about each other. It's like, oh, there's a guy, yeah, who cares? I'm going to do something else here. It's like, there's no interaction. It is completely uninteresting. And what love does create is this attraction and interest between the masculine and the feminine, so that in their interaction the whole universe is born. And very meaningfully, this interaction is not random. This game of polarity is governed by certain principles, certain laws. And not laws in the way like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's just like, the law of gravity. It's just how they naturally actually interact with each other. And this is quite clear in our own personal lives too. Maybe it's with the new waves of feminism, it's becoming increasingly controversial to say this, but there are certain characteristics that are masculine and certain characteristics that are feminine. And there are harmonious ways for those to interact. And we can also see that all harmonious relationships that are harmonious in similar ways, they're not all completely unique, but there are certain patterns, certain roles, certain gender roles that actually are facilitating for this harmonious interaction. And then, just to be clear on that, I'm not saying that all cultural gender roles are right and that they are pure and brilliant and, uncorrupted manifestations of these laws. Like, no, the culture has got many things wrong, but it is pointing towards this reality that there are certain rules in this game of polarity. And by understanding these rules of how the masculine and how the feminine are interacting with each other, basically the laws of creation, we can much more harmoniously participate in life ourselves. Because from this perspective, like the first thing that happens is this creation of the masculine and the feminine role. Everything else that we experience in life is just downstream from that. So by understanding the game of polarity, by understanding the interaction between the masculine and the feminine, we can understand all phenomena of our lives. And this is why it's so meaningful that Eros is considered the first god. By understanding the principles and the mechanisms of love, we can understand everything. In order to understand more principally what love is, we can paint up the picture here of that we have the masculine principle, we have the transcendental, unmanifested reality of God's nature, and then we have the feminine, the creative force, the manifest and the immanent. And then we have the love that is uniting them. Then obviously there are two directions to this love, right? There is the direction from here to here, and there's the direction from here to here. And from this perspective of the transcendental unmanifested, love is the desire to become in order to know oneself out in the manifest. God creates the universe in order to know himself in the manifest. Like he will know himself as a rose bush, he will know himself as a strawberry, he will know himself as heaven, because he creates all these things in which he can see himself reflected. So that is one direction of love, this desire to become. And on the other side, from the manifest towards the transcendent, you have the longing to reabsorb into yourself and to just become complete stillness, just come home in this transcendent nothingness. So love is the simultaneous desire to become and also to reabsorb, to come back home. You could say it's the simultaneous desire of going out on an adventure in the mountains and at the same time the longing to come back home. And it's important to make the distinction there, that this desire is not the desire for chocolate cake or for hot women or for Lamborghinis. It is a more complex mechanism of why those desires come up at all. We will not go into the depth of that here. It's something that Plotinus is writing very meaningfully about and very accurately in the Enneads. I will definitely at some point make a commentary on that because it's very, very illuminating. But what we're gonna say here is that Eros is the longing for the sublime, for the godly ideals, to know the true archetypal realities or the attributes of God's existence, is to know ourselves as we actually are in the transcendent. So it's not about the nice taste of the chocolate or the nice view of the rose that looks sweet, but it is to, through the rose, contemplate God's eternal beauty and sweetness. And in this way, we are coming closer back home to recognizing our nature in our hearts and who we truly are. And for those who have read the Symposium, you can recognize that this sounds very much like Diotima's ladder. And it does. Later in the Symposium, Socrates is speaking more clearly about this mechanism, and also about how you can actually practice it. So we will get to that eventually, but in a video a bit further down the line. I think he's the last speaker, so it might take a while. But for here, we're just gonna remember this distinction. It's not the desire for material things, it's the desire for the eternal things that Eros is about. Now we have a little bit of a metaphysical background here, so let's come back to how does this make us great? How does this make us courageous? How does this help us in all aspects of our lives to actually pursue excellence? How is it more than just a fancy philosophical idea, but how does it actually help us to realize our deeply meaningful goals in life? Because Phaedrus said that Eros is such an important aspect, if not the most important aspect in cultivating virtue. So where are the connections? That's what we're going to look at now. For one, he is saying here about how Eros helps men become heroes. He says the veriest coward would become an inspired hero because Eros would inspire him. And also here we can see hidden between the lines a very, very deeply meaningful notion. We can take it from, first of all, what is heroism? Most of the time in our lives, we're mostly interested about the material aspects. We care about our house, we care about our jobs, we care about how is it going with the kids in school. Everything are quite material and ephemeral concerns. But then there is another aspect, which is this spiritual aspect, which are the godly ideals and the noble things that we would stand up for, like the truth, the good, and the beautiful. And what we could say that heroism is the sacrifice of the lower desires. It's a sacrifice of the attachment to the worldly for the sake of the godly ideals. That doesn't mean that you should sacrifice your kids, but often it is, for example, to sacrifice your life, or to sacrifice your belongings, or to sacrifice your attachment to certain ideas in order to actually defend what is true, what is beautiful, what is eternal, what is good, what is actually in reality valuable. Because our attachments to the worldly things in the end doesn't matter. When we die, we can't take them with us. That's not what matters. That's also what we have in, Jesus saying to not put our treasures in the earth, but to put our treasures up in heaven, because those will always be with us. When we put them in the earth, they will, fade away, they will rust, they will wither, and when we die, who cares? They're not there for us anymore. And this is what is the meaning of this, that the heroic sacrifice is to sacrifice all the treasures, all the concerns on the earth, and instead to focus on defending the treasures in heaven, which are the godly ideals, like, for example, the true, the beautiful, and the good. And this is also something we very meaningfully can correlate to a definition in Plato's Republic of courage, where he says, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he essentially says that courage is the knowledge of what is worth to be afraid of. And it shows the same distinction, that a hero is someone who knows that it's not worth to be afraid of losing my house, or even losing my family, or losing my life. Those things I will anyway lose. What is worth being afraid of is to compromise the godly ideals. And the reason why Eros is the prime giver of virtue and everything that is good is that through Eros we are coming in contact with the essential aspects of reality. Eros is what elevates our soul to recognize the godly ideals. We know, for example, when we are in love, our eyes are just open to everything that is beautiful, to what is meaningful, to what really matters. Which is why people are saying that love is blind, because we don't see things in the same way that we usually do from the ego or from just the mind. But in actuality, it is that love opens our eyes. It is love that actually sees things as they are, which is why love gives us this virtue. It helps us to recognize what really matters, what is worth being afraid of, and what is worth sacrificing for. which is why it turns even cowards into heroes. And then, from there, already really good, right? But from there, it goes even further. He is saying one other statement that is just chock-full with meaning, and also have many hidden principles and notions that, when understood, really potentiates this practice of becoming like God, or becoming virtuous, becoming noble through this force of Eros. And first, just a little background that is necessary to understand here is that he is saying that when we are in a relationship of love, there are three aspects to that. There is the object of love, the beloved, and there is the subject of love, the lover, and then there is the love that unites them. And that doesn't mean that me with my girlfriend, that we decide, okay, I should be the one who love and you are the one who are, just enjoying that love. Like, of course, it is a dynamic, reciprocal thing. But from another essential perspective, just to get like an appropriate model there is this three-dimensional, well, it's two-dimensional, but there is this 3 points that are interacting. There is the lover, there is the beloved, and there is the love. So with that necessary little comment, we dive into the statement here, where he says that the lover is more godly because he is inspired by God. And what he is showing here that is meaningful is that love is active. Love is not just something which we tend to believe in our culture. It's something that strikes us. We say fall in love as it's something that is accidentally happen. But love is actually something we actively choose to do. It's an active manifestation, which this polarity shows, right? The lover is actively manifesting, while the beloved is receiving that love. And what is he saying here is that the lover is more godly because he is inspired by God. And this means that when we are choosing to love actively, then we are actually coming closer to God. We might recognize that like, even though it's very beautiful to be loved, it's often when we choose to love ourselves that actually really transforms us. That are the meaningful like milestones in our lives was when we chose to love, when we chose to sacrifice our ego in order to love, to unite with someone else, to meet them at the level of the heart. That is what gives a transformation. And then because of this, that the love is flowing through us when we choose to love, we are coming closer to God. We are becoming more godly by choosing to manifest love. And there is, as we immediately see here, like kind of emerging from this, another meaning of it, where he's saying that he is more godly because he is inspired by God. And this shows that love is not human. It is not us who love. It is God's love. That love is an attribute of God. Again, if we take this, because when we speak about God, it can become very dogmatic and it feels like hocus pocus. But it's important to realize that like what we're talking about here when I say God, and also as they actually use the word theos in Greek, is not necessarily a being, at least not from that perspective, but that it is this undifferentiated void. It is just the essence of creation itself. It has certain characteristics, and one of them is love, which is an attribute of God's nature, of basically the whole existence itself is characterized by love, and many other things, but one of them being love. So what he's saying here is that love is something that is not ours, but it is God's, and that we can choose to be inspired by love, to open ourselves up to manifest it, but it does not belong to us. And to make this a little bit more distinct, we can correlate this to Pythagoras' model of the music of the spheres, and also to modern physics and quantum mechanics that looks at reality as energetic, that everything is just vibration. from Pythagoras' perspective, we could say that everything is music. The whole creation is just a celestial orchestra. It's a symphony, and that love, being an attribute of the very nature of this reality, is a subtle sublime energy that has a vibratory frequency that never changes. It is a note, it is a tone that has the specific frequency that manifests as love. So when we are doing what Phaedrus suggests there, to be active, to love actively, and to be inspired by God, the process there is very, very close to what Pythagoras and also Boethius was describing, of tuning ourselves to the macrocosmic harmony. That we can recognize, where is the note of love? How does love actually feel? Where is this distinct quality, this distinct state of consciousness that is love? And by finding that distinct frequency, we can tune our own consciousness to resonate with that love. And in this way, we become inspired by God. We become these vessels of God who can manifest this energy, and in that way become more godly. Because when that energy flows through us, it's also colors us. It's very meaningful to see it as an instrument that we're tuning. Like maybe it's a bit disharmonious, we're a bit sad, or we feel a bit indifferent, we don't feel any, connections to those around us, or we don't feel connections to our ideals or to what truly matters. And then when we just tune our strings inside of ourselves a little bit, so we resonate with love, and then bam, then this energy flows out, and we start to express that. And then in this way, we are ennobling our souls. And then also through this miracle of love is that it raises us to a perspective where we can begin to recognize other godly attributes as well. That it becomes natural for us to manifest and to discover what is meaningful and what is true, good, and beautiful, and also what is worth to sacrifice for. Where can we, manifest heroically and courageously? All these things come more natural when we have made this conscious choice to step up into a more godly way of existence. So that is the summary or synthesis of Phaedrus here. There is, as you see, there's a lot of correlations that come into it, and I can't talk about all of them here. This is the most meaningful that I found at the top of my head after quite quick reading and contemplating it for a bit. So I'm sure that in time I will make more commentaries looking at more principles and notions to make it more and more clear. But these are all very significant notions that are presented here, and I really recommend to listen through them again and really look at them and try to find examples in your own life, because these are fundamental perspectives that are sort of governing everything. And when we truly understand them, which we only can do by practice, by implementing them in our own lives and get to know them personally, not as just intellectual, interesting curiosa, but to really tune our lives to these truths, that's when we truly know them. Which is kind of the tragedy of intellectualism, or the amateurishness of intellectualism, as Evola said, that it usually just stays at speculation and it doesn't really become embodied. We don't actually really know these truths personally, but we just have conceptual ideas about them. So I really recommend to look into how can you find this in your own lives, how can you put this in practice. And you're always also just free to reach out to me if you need any help with doing that. I'd be happy to. And then for the next one, we're going to look at the next speaker. And I don't actually know who it is myself. I'm kind of I'm recording these as I'm reading them. So we'll see what that is, and we'll find. And until then, wish you happy and very successful practice and an amazing life.